Uh, Here we go. So there's a discussion that was going around about the buff to permafrost. So I'd like to dive into that. For the most part, yes, it is a worse anchor, but anchor is a good relic, so it's kind of fine. But I wanted to look into is the timing of the permafrost actually helping you? And I'm going to run a few scenarios um, that are kind of oversimplified, but very specific and should be illuminating to extreme cases where one might be better than the other. Um, but for the most part, if we assume that a lot of things are just a wash, the chances of the enemies attacking are going to be the same, over the long term. Um, then yeah, 10 is bigger than 7, and Anchor is going to do better. Um, but so I'll jump down to here. So what am I ignoring? In theory, you could manipulate permafrost, but in some that's like great for edge cases and maybe something I should look into doing a little bit more, but like it's not really me. I think a lot of the time you see the power, you play the power, and that's just how you want to do it, right? So I'm not gonna the simulation that's following is not going to take this into account. But yeah, maybe you draw a heat sink, so you know it's a shorter fight, and maybe you it was a fifth maybe it was a very marginal benefit, but you lean towards not playing it because your next power you might need to block that turn. um, that's a little bit of a finesse play, but I mean a lot of times it's like you're drawing an after image and it's like I definitely would rather I want to play that. I'm not gonna hold off. I'm not gonna skip on that entirely because I'm gonna want to block with permafrost later. We're just gonna for the now treat this as negligible. We're gonna go like brain off, sea power, power, and then calculate the rest from there. And even then, we're gonna see maybe sometimes permafrost the timing actually helps you, but not always, and maybe not even usually. So I'm gonna run a few simulations here. So um, I want to look what happens over the course of 3 turns. So I'm going to assume that you have a deck that's like 3 hands, and I'm not going to fully randomize it. I'm going to oversimplify it by just assuming you'll get those 3 hands, but you don't know which turn you're going to get them. And the boat relic, I'm going to oversimplify that, and because the only the anchor is a common relic, the other ones are higher rarity and a higher amount of block. But I'm going to oversimplify it with a fictional relic called Boat 2 and Boat 3. Um, all of which for block 10, but on different turns. Um, so we're going to assume that we're playing 3 turns. We're going to assume that enemy is attacking for 10 damage every turn, and you can't end the fight early or anything like that. It's just you need to play these powers, and then you'll mop it up later. So yeah, we're gonna. I already said this one. So the 3 hypothetical decks for this hypothetical enemy going to be laid out on the next page. So I don't want any other complications. No powers helping us, no relics. If we see the power, we play the power. Uh, and well, 10 is obviously 2 defends, which is great, and 10 is obviously full blocked by Anchor, but Permafrost currently blocks for 7, so it gets a little weird. So you can choose to either overblock, or you can choose in some cases to full block, or not quite full block, and just take the 3 damage because you didn't want to overblock. So those two are going to be those two. There'll be a lot of cases where one of those two downsides is what you accept. All right, so I'm going to call uh, these the other hands you might get. So 3 strikes and 2 defends, or 2 strikes, 2 defends, and inflame 2 strikes, 2 defends, and demon form. And the decks I'm going to look at is you get 3 of this hand where you have strike, strike, defend, fend, and inflame, but that happens all 3 turns. Scenario number two, you get one of your three hands has an inflame in it. So it's this hand right here. That only happens once, and your other hands are strike, strike, defend, defend, strike. And then scenario number three is the spicy one that is gonna. Spoiler: this one's good for permafrost. The other two are not. So um, yeah. So the deck number three is you get strike, strike, defend, defend, strike. Two out of three hands, and then one of your hands you get strike, strike, defend, defend, and demon form. Uh, so let's just run the numbers here. So the deck where you have three hands that have inflame, you want to full. You gotta play the power. You gotta block twice, and that happens two out of three turns, whether it's permafrost or the boat relic. So on the turn where you have the boat relic, you get to full block for free, and you play inflame in two strikes. So um, that's what you get. You get a turn like this is what the relic does for you. The rest of the time, it's a complete. Well, you get to play the inflame and two defends, but that happens twice no matter what. But if instead of a boat turn you have a permafrost turn, you play it an inflame and a strike. You're blocking for seven. You each choose whether to play the defend, and you only play one strike this turn, or you go ahead and you play the second strike and you take three damage. So if you, uh, yeah, so if you have two defends every turn and two strikes every turn, and you're choosing whether to, you know, how do you want to play it, and you get an inflame, well, um, Permafrost uh, lets you play one strike or lets you play an additional strike, but you lose three health. So that's one of those the downside. Either one strike fewer or three health fewer. So that's exactly what you expect from a worse ankle. So, uh, and when I was thinking about it, deck number two, only one of your hands has inflame, but it actually works out the exact same way. Um, so what happens at the end of the day? You still play these eight or nine cards. It doesn't really matter uh, when you draw your inflame. So, uh, so like if you um, only turn, so yeah. So there's two different ways it might play out, but you still take zero dinner damage, and you still play these cards. So if you draw Inflame on your boat turn, you play Inflame, defend, or you play Inflame, strike, strike, but then you play the other two strikes with the other four defends. So you play defend, defend, strike, defend, defend, strike, and your Inflame turn happens to be Inflame, strike, strike. Uh, but it's the exact same cards, but remixed if the boat turn lands on a strike turn. So if you get a, if your boat turn uh, has your three strikes and two defense, you just play the three strikes, and then you play defend, defend, strike on a regular turn, and then you play defend, defend, inflame when you draw inflame, but without the boat. So, but when you add up how many of each do you play, it's still this. So, I mean, there are additional sub variations depending on. I could have picked a different example because depending on how early you draw the inflame influences how much do you get out of the strikes, but I'm going to ignore that for now. The point is you take zero damage, uh, and your damage input is these cards, but the order you play them uh, gets could get a little bit mixed up. Um, But if you don't have the boat relic, you could play it exactly the same way, but uh, the turn where you play in flame, you have a choice as to whether you want to play another defend full block, and then you get a total of 3 strikes, or um, the turn that you play in flame, you go ahead and play 2 strikes instead of one, and you accept the 3 HP. And it actually turns out to be a worse anchor. So this case was the very last one that I looked at, and so I kind of surprised myself a little because I thought this would be different from case one, but it's weirdly the same as case number one, but remixed. But case number three is where it starts to look good for Permafrost. So I mean, there are a lot of decks where it lots of little power sweeten your deck, and those kinds of decks kind of play out like scenario one or scenario two, and then Permafrost is a worse anchor. But if for some reason the only power that you have is this really big important demon form, and then everything else is just, you're impervious and blah blah blah, uh, then it gets pretty interesting. Then probability starts playing a role. So if the demon form is out of sync with a boat relic, then you see power, you play power, and you take the 10 damage. You're out of energy, you take the 10 damage, and overall, the other 2 turns you defend, defend, strike, defend, defend, strike, but you lost 10 damage on your demon form turn. Uh, you know what? I actually kind of lied here. The boat on the turn where the boat relic actually triggers. Uh, you actually get to play. Yeah, because there's a strike, defend, defend, and a strike, strike, strike. So I was a little bit off there. This one is going to be accurate though. Um, so if your demon form does sync up with the boat, then on your demon form turn, you get to play demon form, and you also take 0 damage, which is great. And then you get to play 2 strikes and to defend both of the other two turns. But uh, losing 10 health to play 2 strikes kind of sucks. So I would say this one's kind of losing. Uh, uh, yeah, the 2 extra strikes is probably not really what he wanted there. And finally, we're looking at permafrost. So no matter what, permafrost triggers on your demon form turn, and you take 3 damage instead of 10. Uh, and so if you average this out, you lose. The boat relic loses 6 to 10, or 6 or 7 HP on average, and permafrost consistently loses just the flat 3. Um, I could all add this just to be fair. Uh, so 2/3 of the time you get to play 2 extra strikes. So you're losing 6 or 7 HP to play a strike, 1 and a third strikes. Um, so um, yeah, it's kind of um, there are a lot of situations where you don't want to drop, uh, 7 health to play 1.5 strikes. So um, it's enough that I can say that on this kind of deck, I'm leaning toward Permafrost being better. But in most of the decks that I actually play, there are usually a few one cost powers that are really, really tempting. So for the most part, Anchor is still, Anchor is great. Everyone knows Anchor is great. So it's fine that if Permafrost is kind of a worse Anchor, but um, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you get this deck and um, yeah, you just lean slightly toward uh, having a turn like this be like the major feature. All right, so that's it. Uh, Permafrost. Yep, it's worse than Anchor, but maybe not quite, or maybe not always. To say it's a complicated game. So that's it.